morning, Timothy. Can you hear me now? Your mic is muted. Oh, wow. Okay, I hope that you come back. Your mic is muted. When you come back, please unmute and join us. And good morning to everybody who is on Clubhouse. Thank you for joining us. We are about to start the live session of Japanese politics. So we are streaming now on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter as well. Timothy is coming back, hopefully. Let's see. And today we're going to talk about what happened during the past 1 week in the politics here in Japan. As you know, Timothy is the person who presents the news, gives the briefing every Sunday morning. He is the CEO of Langley Squire, the company consultancy in Tokyo, based in Tokyo. Timothy have a cumulative 40 years of living and working in Japan, in Japanese politics as well. So he's here today again to brief us about the major events in politics. He disappeared though. He's on his boat, as you already noticed, I believe. Hopefully we'll have him come back and see what happens.
Okay.
Hi again. Thank you for coming back. I was worried that I lost you for today.
I'm sorry I gave you a heart attack, Maya.
You did, yes. Well, I already introduced you to everybody who already knows you, by the way, so let's start without any delay.
Thank you very much, Maya, and good morning, everybody. Today is July 24th. Tomorrow's payday. We're going to talk today about what's been going on in Japanese politics over the last week or so. The shadow of Shinzo Abe is still lingering. It's still very heavy. There has been an announcement of a state funeral, which will be held, I think, about the 27th, almost a month from now, in September. This is a pretty big deal. The decision to have a state funeral was made very quickly after the elections were called. The prime minister was meeting with several members of his inner group, and they decided at that point to pursue the idea of having a state funeral for the assassinated former prime minister. This is a pretty big deal. I mean, we had even the wake for him included, 2,500 people. This is just people paying their respects. There is a 47-day mourning period. There will be another kind of ceremony as called on by Japanese culture and how this sort of thing is done under the religious aspects of life and death and birth and getting married in this country. But the 27th of next month receives a little bit of controversy. Initially, it was viewed as a very good idea, particularly by Mr. Kishida, who envisions, and it likely will happen, leaders from all over the world coming to Japan to pay their respects to the slain leader of, the longest serving Japanese prime minister. So it's going to be a big deal. And if you're prime minister and you're looking to get your numbers up, this is a watershed. So probably somewhat selfishly, he liked that idea and pursued it. Now it's beginning to generate a little bit of controversy about who's going to pay for it. Why are we doing a state funeral for this prime minister who we don't like? There's a civic group that's already formed to launch a lawsuit for state funds being expended, but it's going to go through. It's already been decided. The cabinet has approved it. So it's passed all the legal hurdles. The budget, the last time they did something like this, it cost, around 90 million yen as the state's contribution. Who knows how much else it costs, but this is going to be a far bigger deal. So it's something not to look forward to, but it is something of a point of inflection and reflection, and a lot will happen as a consequence of this state funeral. Interestingly enough, his good friend Vladimir Putin will be barred from attending. He will not attend, but I'm sure the ambassador will pay his respects. One of the other legacies of Mr. Abe is the constitutional revision debate. And just at the same time that the elections were called for the LDP did extremely well in this last election. The prime minister went forward to say, I'm going to pursue Mr. Abe's legacy of constitutional revision. And Mr. Motegi, the LDP General Secretary, also reiterated that by saying we will move aggressively on that. Several people echoed that, and so it looks like this is taking on renewed energy. But once again, there are proponents that don't like that sort of thing. So the battle is beginning to firm up. Brad Glossman wrote an interesting piece in the Japan Times just this last week talking about constitutional revision and his assessment that it's not going to happen for the next couple of years. It takes too much anticipation, too much preparation. I'm of the view that it's going to happen sooner rather than later. We're just waiting for some critical event, some act event to happen to galvanize the voting population. We already have the numbers. I mean, the LDP already has the numbers for having the referendum. In order to have the referendum, 2/3 of the lower house, 2/3 of the upper house. I think the LDP, if it pushes it through, can get that. The only kind of critical element here is in revising the Constitution, the members of the Diet, the 2/3 in the lower house, the 2/3 in the upper house, they don't have to agree not only on revising the Constitution, but they have to agree on the exact language that is going to be proposed to the voting population too. So it is a thorny issue, but at the same time, the LDP has been working on this for 20 years. So the language, the variations of the language have already been well masticated. And so I think when the elements come together, it will happen rather quickly. Mr. Kishida is a bit of on a roll. The cabinet approval, they've just done a poll. You know, the Japanese love polls, and I think the Japanese politicians rely on polls to tell them what the people are thinking. These carry a lot of weight. Gigi and NHK did a poll just this last week, and these are very closely followed. It's kind of like with the death of Mr. Abe and the reflection from the foreign community and all of the outpouring from many of the other countries. The Japanese policymakers and Japanese politicians really are impacted by that sense that it's not in trade wars, it's gaiatsu, but the impact of the foreign perception of what's going on in Japan is very, very heavy. And also, you know, the reflection from Japanese voting population and consumers really guides how policy is made. So the fact that the Kishida administration is scoring high marks, they're not as high as they were going into the election. They're maybe 1 point lower, but they're still a 59% approval rating. And that's very high. And so he's got a lot of wind in his sails. Right now, the Diet is in recess. It'll start up in August, in early August. It will have an extraordinary Diet session that will go until the end of the year, until sometime in December, late December. They'll close up for the new year and then start in early January for their required 150-day Diet session where they actually are focused almost exclusively on passing the budget. So there will be a lot going on between now and December, particularly since the Diet is not in session. Diet members are taking a bit of a break. There's a lot of vacancy. There's a lot of a lighter air that's going on within the Diet offices. People are in their election districts. One of the other kind of important aspects of the passing of former Prime Minister Abe is he leaves a seat open in Yamaguchi number 3, a lower house seat that he vacated needs to have a by-election. And I think it's 130 days that that they must have a by-election unless there's an election that coincides with that. So somebody has to fill that seat. They asked Akie, his his wife, his widow, if she was interested in running in that seat. Of course, she would have won. She declined for a lot of different reasons. She also visited the Obi Faction and gave her blessing for the Obi Faction to take the mantle of his leadership and to preserve the legacy that he had. So that was a meeting that was had this last week. She also paid a visit to the Prime Minister's office. It was a flurry of activity. The purpose of her meeting with the Prime Minister, going to the Prime Minister's office and talking with Tado Aso and Mr. Motegi, is just to express her gratitude for all that they've done over the last week. It's only been a week, 2 weeks since it's happened. So there's still a huge legacy. By the way, I'm reporting from the deck of the good ship Santana. There's a little bit of turbulence going on here. So, looks like a shipping, a fishing boat just passed by. Are we still good, Maya? Are we still good? I can't hear you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I was muted. Please don't fall overboard.
Yes, well, I think somebody's trying to throw me overboard.
Right. Stay there.
Okay, thank you.
And continue.
So, with the cabinet approval being as it is, there definitely will be, and the Prime Minister has also talked about it, a cabinet reshuffle. He said he's going to keep his key advisors. So that means his key advisors within the LDP, his key advisors within the cabinet. The pregnant pause there is that there are some people that will definitely go. Those people that were inserted at the behest or at the insistence of Mr. Abe personally to have certain individuals in there. He's got the largest faction, 98 individuals in his faction. Mr. Kishida is number 5 in the running. So he's got, other people who have more faction seats and thus deserve more cabinet positions. So that calculus is very complicated and it's going to change now. And I suspect that some LDP positions, it's just an awful hard thing to do. Sanai Takaichi she ran against Mr. Kishida as a prime minister candidate and got a policy position post within the LDP, one of the top 4 positions. She was promoted by Mr. Abe, and she is a very powerful figure, potentially a prime minister candidate. So what to do with her in that very important, very valuable policy directorate is open to question. The Minister of Defense is Mr. Abe's younger brother. Mr. Suzuki is the finance minister, a brother-in-law of Tado Aso, who was a long-term finance minister. So there is predicted to be a little bit of a shakeup. Mr. Kishida is starting to generate a little bit of backlash too. There are people who are beginning to criticize him, the do-nothing prime minister. You've heard that refrain before. So there are some things that are not going quite in his favor. The yen has fallen in his terms of office. The yen has fallen 25%. COVID, more than 80% of the COVID infections have occurred during his term, even though we've long talked about the reason for his popularity was because of his response to COVID and his response to opening the borders. So there's a lot going on that detracts from the shine that he has. His push to, it's not initially his push, but he kind of sealed the deal for increasing the defense budget from 1% to 2% of GDP. So he's got some detractors, but he's got some wind in his sails too. So it's very important for us to watch all of these things. A lot of the things that we follow are like trial balloons. They talk about, the Children's Agency and what they're going to do. How are they going to implement that? They talk about a new cabinet position initially for startups. And after just a week of exploring that, it's not a new ministry or a new agency. It's just another round of things to do for one of the existing ministers of state. We haven't decided which one that's going to be. But these kinds of things, they go forward and then they come back after a little bit of reflection, a little bit of backlash from the press or from the population or maybe from the Ministry of Finance. and you know, bouncing between the high walls, this pinball kind of ricochets off, and eventually we're going forward. Also, with the yen last time we talked, the yen was at 139 to the dollar, and I thought, with this psychological barrier of 140, once it breaks that, the sky is kind of open. It backed off a little bit. It's now at 138. So what the administration, Mr. Kuroda, did over the last week was effective, and it looks like it might continue to be effective. They had a 3-day meeting that ended this last week. Mr. Kuroda is firm in his loose monetary policy. They appointed 2 new people to replace some board members there. It's a sign of things that are changing, but the president of the Bank of Japan will be changing anyway in about 7 months. So there are contenders that are kind of lobbying to be the next Bank of Japan president. But he's holding firm on his monetary policy, even in light of the fact that other nations within the G20, in fact, are really tightening up. Japan is an outlier here, but Mr. Kuroda is firm in his conviction that hitting a 2% inflation rate, even though it's overshot a little bit now, he blames that on Ukraine, he blames that on Russia, he blames that on the United States having a kind of in the doldrums, maybe even recession now, but he thinks that holding the course will keep us firm. The other report that came out of the Bank of Japan meeting last week was that inflation was at 1.9. That was the target. It is now at 2.3. But once again, he says that's an over adjustment. The economy is dealing with a temporary situation. But for the gross domestic product, that was predicted to be 2.9, and it has fallen to 2.4. So the Japanese economy is shrinking a little bit, and it's predicted to shrink a little bit more. He predicts that inflation will stay at 1.9 by this time next year. So the way this kind of moves on a national scale is pretty slow. But if the Bank of Japan says it's going to be 1.9, it's usually pretty accurate. It's as close to 2% as he's always predicted. And as I said, the yen stands right now at 138 to the dollar. Let's follow what happens over this week and next week. And if we come back from that 140 benchmark, I think the Japanese economy will begin to stabilize. But everybody says it's just going to be a very tough year. It's tough for a lot of reasons, not just because of the yen ratio and the Japanese purchasing based on dollar. So the economy is slowing down because the costs are rising, but also on energy costs. So one of the other things that Mr. Kishida said very strongly this last week was what we're going to do with nuclear energy. There are 10 plants that are geared. They've received the okay to begin producing electricity. 5 of those are already kind of in process. They're going through final testing or final checks. 5 of them will be up and running pretty soon, but we've got to get the other 5 up and running for the winter season. So we're pushing very closely on that. The Japanese government is. They understand that there's going to be an energy crunch in the winter. There's an energy crunch right now with the air conditioners. And the other thing is with liquid natural gas. A lot of that, not a huge amount, but enough to make a difference, 8%, comes from the Sakhalin-2 project. And as you might remember, Vladimir Putin said that this Sakhalin-2, which was a consortium of Russian, U.S., Canadian, and Japanese conglomerates, Mitsui and Mitsubishi in particular, went together, they pooled their resources, and as a consequence of that, Japan receives about 8% of LNG capacity through that consortium. The president of Russia has said now that we're going to change that. That Sakhalin-2 is going to go into a new corporate entity, and anybody that is a current partner now, a current owner of the shares, you need to weigh in to the new corporate structure. And so you need to let us know within 30 days how much investment, new investment, you're going to pour into this new company, and then we're going to decide what the distribution is of the gas that you might get. So the cards are all in his hands. Even if they provide a proposal that is lucrative and enticing, it doesn't mean that it will be accepted. And even if it is accepted, it could be held back a little bit, or the 8% could be held back because of Japan's reaction to Russian sanctions promoted by the United States and other European countries. So there's a lot of delicacy going on there. The fact that the president is uninvited to the Abe funeral is another slap. So there's still a lot to be going on there. Also, you might be following the Ministry of Defense and their National Strategic Report, and also their annual report. It came out just this last week, identifying Russia and China as primary concerns for conflict. So this is a pretty big deal. It is an indication of the 10-year plan, the National Strategic Initiative by the Ministry of Defense, that talks about what Japan is going to do, how they're going to implement this newfound wealth. 100% increase in their defense spending will be released probably in the fall. So it's highly anticipated because it talks about military armament, it talks about systems deployment, it talks about defense capabilities, and they've also issued an interesting directive to the Defense Ministry on purchases that they have in mind. Typically, the Defense Department or various divisions, the Air Force, the land, the Marine bases, would promote an idea for maintaining or spending the money that they got last year, plus a little bit of an increase because they want to do this or that. This year going forward, with the 10%, the 100% going from 1% of GDP to 2% of GDP, what they're going to, how they're going to spend that money, what they've told the people who are forming their budgets, which will be reviewed in, towards the end of the year and more actively towards the beginning of next year, and then the budget will be passed in April, is just tell us what you want. Don't put a price on it. Don't put a cap on it. Just tell us what your view is, what your vision is for enhancing Japan's capabilities, and we'll talk about the costs later. So this is very unusual from an accounting perspective, but it does tell you that there's a huge change that's going on within just the Ministry of Defense. But in fact, there's a huge change going on all around us. You don't need to be watching this show every week to understand that or to notice that. There's a great change afoot. Moving on with COVID, that's been in the news for these last 2 weeks, but understandably so. Before the election started and then the election week, the COVID numbers shot up 100% from a very brief period of time. For a period of 2 weeks, the BA.5 subvariant has taken off like wildfire. It is infected on a daily basis. It's broken all the records in Tokyo and throughout Japan. On a daily basis, 180,000 people per day nationally. Tokyo broke their record. The highest record that they had was in the midst, in the peak of the 6th wave, probably in February. But they're at 31,000 people a day. And the numbers just keep on increasing. People are watching it very closely on the news for it to peak down, and hopefully that the peak has been eclipsed. So people are watching that very carefully. For 35 of the 47 prefectures, they have all registered the highest number of COVID infections. In light of that, the Prime Minister has said there will be no new countermeasures for this new wave. He backed off of that 2 days later and said there will be new measures, but they're measures that really don't amount to much. He's going to increase the availability of the 4th shot for first responders, for hospital workers, for people who are at need of 60 years and older. Most of the people have already received their third shot. So he's pushing on the fourth shot, and he's making testing more available throughout the country in railroad stations and that sort of thing for free. So they're not countermeasures as countermeasures used to be understood. Governor Koike has really pushed hard for more stringent measures. You know, Tokyo is one of the worst hit areas because of the population. The number of ambulances that are being flagged, there was a news report the other day talking about the crisis center for ambulances just in Tokyo, and how busy they are picking up seriously ill people. Of the thousands of people that have been infected with the new COVID variant, though, only 114 or so have been registered as very serious. So the hospitals are filling up with these serious cases, but it's not like it was when we were first hit by COVID and people were actually dying of that. So this new variant is not as hurtful as the other one. The Obi Faction requires some discussion because it being the largest political force within the LDP, and therefore the largest political force within Japanese politics. Without their leader now, they are trying to figure out what they're going to do. They have come up with a kind of council of elders, council of leading politicians. That means those who have survived probably 5 or more elections. So there are 6 individuals who have been identified, they've pulled together. They can't select one. You know what it's like. Nobody really likes the other person to be more of a leader than they are. So they've had several meetings over the last 2 weeks. They still can't figure it out. And as a consequence of that, you know, the lines are being kind of divided between, you know, we used to be friends and colleagues and drink and slap each other on the back, but now we're vying for, you know, who's going to take over this 98-person faction. And I think the combination is just not there. I don't think that they're going to be able to settle on a single leader, and I don't think that they're going to be able to adequately control a faction of that size through a distribution of authority. It's just, I think it's just too hard. So they've said that they're not going to make any more decisions beyond what we know right now until after the state funeral. So I think people are just sharpening their knives and getting ready for what's going to happen. I can't perceive that the Abe faction is as powerful and as, you know, as tied to it as I am, can logistically stay together without the gel, without the concrete drive and power of personality that Mr. Abe exerted over all of the members there for an extended period of time. At the same time, there were 20 brand new Diet members elected in this last election from the LDP. These 20 new members are all looking for a faction to join. They could remain independent, but probably getting elected in the first place, they required a little bit of push, a little bit of encouragement, maybe some campaign financing legitimately, and some speeches on the sound trucks to help get them elected. So they will be making their decisions too. That's 20 new ones. Mr. Kishida, as I said, is number 5. Mr. Abe is first, and you've got other very powerful politicians who have their own factions and want to keep them. Mr. Kishida, as prime minister, is an attractive target to join if you're either leaving a faction that you're disavowed, you have disavowed, or you're dissatisfied with, or you were bound to Mr. Abe, but with Mr. Abe gone, then you're looking for something. You still want to have a cabinet portfolio. Every member of the Diet wants to become prime minister, and in order to become prime minister, you need to have a cabinet portfolio three times, doing something of significance to even qualify. And in fact, the portfolios that you are required to have, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Finance, Minister of Trade and Industry, those 3, you need to have a stint at one of those to kind of be in the running. So having a cabinet portfolio is, key, and that's why people join different factions, because they believe that their leader will be able to parcel out a cabinet position to them. So that means that when Mr. Kishida does do his cabinet reshuffle, I think the temptation to shuffle more than fewer is in his favor. It just enhances his ability. He's got, many people say, a 3-year term where he's not going to be hounded by an election campaign or that sort of thing. But I don't know. I think it's still going to be very difficult for the current prime minister to maintain a very steady flow and to keep the economy going. He will be attacked. There will be some mistakes and some scandals that hit him. It's possible that there could be a closure of the election within the next 2 years, or maybe even within the next year. You just never know in Japanese politics, so it's important to keep an eye on that. So what's going to happen with the Obi faction is a key feature. We're going to continue to watch that. It is just the impact of that happening is so huge in Japanese politics. 98 members splitting up. They've said that they're going to keep it the Obi faction, maintain the name of it, but I think that's just something as a matter of time. This week, the president of Indonesia, Joko Widodo, will visit. He'll be here for 3 days. And at the same time, the prime minister will be entertaining. It'll be a state visit. So you'll see flags on a lot of the light posts for Indonesia. And that's what it's about. 3 days he will visit with the emperor. He'll visit with the prime minister. It'll be a full-blown dog and pony show for him. Of other interest was the visit of the South Korean foreign minister, who typically, from time to time, they will visit with the prime minister. This one did. Mr. Park did visit with the prime minister, with the foreign minister, had good access there. And at the same time, the newly appointed ambassador from South Korea took office a week ago today. And so he had a busy week having his boss in town at the same time. So a lot going on diplomatically there that will continue to take up the prime minister's time. And also it's one of the things that he does particularly well is the diplomacy end. The G20 will be held in April of next year. I think it's April of next year. They've decided that. The Hiroshima, they've already had a committee that's set up for that. So there's a lot of energy being devoted to the diplomatic portion of Japan's, State of the Union. So always keep your eye out for who's visiting, who the prime minister is visiting. This thing with Korea and Japan is really a high priority for the South Koreans and also for Japan. So a lot of concessions can be considered to be in the making. The foreign minister, when he came, he met with business leaders, he met with other political groups, and he stated publicly, his desire, his drive to fix the relationship, which has suffered really badly under the last administration of Mr. Park. So there's a lot of work to be done there, but there's also a lot of impetus to get that going. So look forward to perhaps visa-free travel between South Korea and Japan. I think that's in the works. And also some new tie-ups and business ventures. And finally, the Japan birth rate. It was announced just this last week that Japan birth rate has fallen to its lowest level in 122 years. This is impactful because maintaining national productivity is required. It's directly related to the population. So, currently at 1.3% of births per woman, it's definitely not at replenishment level, which would be 2.0. Actually more, because not every woman is having children. But what they said was that live births are down 30% from their peak in 1949, which was 2.7 million. 30% from that. And just recently, the 1.3%, 1.3 child per female is continuing to fall. Okinawa was the highest fertility rate at 1.8, and Kagoshima is 1.6, and Miyazaki is at 1.6 as well. The lowest is Tokyo at 1.08, Miyagi at 1.1, and Hokkaido, surprisingly enough, at 1.2. I would have thought Hokkaido was a more productive area, but let's see. Anyway, that's my report for today. All of these things have impact on what's going on in Japanese politics and the economy and the culture, in Japan's relationship with its trading partners, and also militarily, geopolitically. Please stay tuned to our briefing every week. We try and give you all the news that's important to you, try and analyze it and give it to you in something that's easily understandable, and something that you can that's useful for you in making your decisions every day. Maya?
Timothy, thank you for keeping your balance on the boat, for staying there.
They didn't throw me off.
Yeah, that's such a good thing. So I guess that you can continue with the questions and answers
Yes,
on Clubhouse, right? Okay,
I can.
so thank you. So let's move there onto Clubhouse and continue with the session, because there are quite a few questions already we have
Okay.
there. Yes. So thank you. I will
Okay,
see you.
everyone on LinkedIn, on YouTube, thank you very much for watching. We will switch over to Clubhouse now for the Q&A portion. Thank you, Maya. Signing off.
Thank you. See you over there.